In this video, it highlights the critical issue of what I think is found in some atheist content. Please do disclaimer, it is not saying all atheist content. Some atheist content is actually kind of good, but even as an atheist, I avoid certain channels because they can be a bit leaping in their assumptions. And this is an example of that. This video will be covering how using this video as a proxy will explain the exact issues atheists can fall into and why you should never fall into this trap.
To this discussion about one of the most pressing and fascinating shifts happening quietly across the world. Why will the next generation likely turn away from religion? Why will so many of our children grow up without the beliefs that shaped entire civilizations for thousands of years? This is not a prediction made lightly. It's a conclusion supported by data, culture, psychology, and the direction society is moving in every single day.
Claiming this, it falls into the first trap. Society is going in that direction every single day. But there should be a huge asterisk here, in the sense that we're only going in that direction in certain parts of the world, only in certain cultures and societies. There's some things out there and certain cultures which still adheres to reverence towards elders, loyalty towards your superiors. Genuinely speaking. This is a case in point in which, if you have that mindset, it can lead to a case where, even if all of these steps is in order for the theoretical development of atheism, it won't develop. Because if then you're dealing with something in which there is that structure in play, you're not going to get the exact outcome you're wanting in the situation. And there's some of these points and says bit leaping in judgment, very much a American-centric mindset in certain things. Because despite them using more AI, I can tell they're more American because a lot of their leaping judgments is, well, American logic thinking.
When you look at the patterns across history, you see something striking. Beliefs change more slowly than technology, but they do change. There was a time when people could not imagine life without kings, without absolute monarchs ordained by God. That era ended. There was a time when slavery was justified through Scripture, considered natural and eternal. That era ended too. Today we look at those past certainties and wonder how anyone accepted them. In the same way, future generations will look at absolute religious authority and see something strange, something that no longer fits the world they live in. The numbers already tell the story. Surveys across Europe, North America, parts of Asia, and even regions long considered bastions of faith show the same trend.
The first trap is fell into by default. The whole thing of history is constantly progressing argument. It is not always constantly progressing. The reality is, a lot of the stuff surrounding what he's talking about here is random. It fundamentally depends on the people's willingness and ability to want to change things. Because what can happen is, sometimes the conditions for it can be ripe for change, but people don't act on it. And therefore, by not acting on it, it dies. This is the issue you face here. And this will come up because the later point, a later point in this will be talking about the talk of democracy, about how democracy is a guarantee in terms of a sense of entitlement. And that's why I say they're probably American.
Fewer people attend religious services. Fewer identify with any organized religion, and among the young, belief in traditional doctrines is collapsing at an unprecedented pace. In some countries, like Sweden or the Czech Republic, those who claim no religion are already the majority. In the United States, long seen as deeply religious, the number of people who call themselves nuns, meaning no religious affiliation, has surged to nearly 30%. And among Gen Z, that figure is even higher. In South Korea, in Canada, in Australia, the same pattern repeats. And here's the critical point. Belief rarely bounces back. When a generation lets go of old certainties, they almost never return to them in adulthood. So what is driving this change? It's easy to point to technology, the internet, social media, access to information, and yes, that matters. A child today can learn.
Argument, therefore, is another issue argument here. Because someone can be knowledgeable, have access to knowledge, by one means or another. Even if the government restricts access temporarily, there's ways around it. Yada yada yada. But the factor here you have to work with is what is the willingness of the person to deal with it. Is the person willing to cooperate? Willing to get the information and change themselves? Correct their failed understandings? Or is it rather like, okay, cool information, and now I'll get back to what I was doing. Anyway, back to the video.
Questions that once seemed dangerous or forbidden are now a click away. When a teenager asks, "Why does a good God allow suffering?" they no longer have to accept the single answer their community offers. They can explore philosophy, science, history, and countless perspectives instantly. That alone weakens the monopoly that religion once had.
Here made me think he's American. The whole thinking of you can talk about anything in a unrestricted internet. Very American thinking. Because in a lot of the world, you can't do that. In a lot of the world, you can still access information about it, but you can't just talk about whatever you want. That's just the reality of things. So, as I said, the conditions behind it is still not suitable in some countries for true open access of information. So, that's all I'm saying on this point. And there's reeks of entitlement on the creator's end.
But the internet is only part of the story. The deeper forces go beyond screens and algorithms. They reach into the very fabric of modern life. Think about morality. For centuries, religions claimed to be the source of ethics, warning that without God, society would collapse into chaos. Yet today, some of the most secular nations, Denmark, Norway, Japan, rank among the safest, most stable, and most compassionate on Earth. Crime rates are low, life expectancy is high, education is strong, and social trust thrives. These are not perfect societies, but they prove a point. Morality does not require faith. Children growing up in this world see that goodness, fairness, and cooperation are possible without divine command. And once you see that, it's hard to believe that morality depends on a supernatural lawgiver. Let me recap after my CPD run. Another factor is science. not just as a body of knowledge, but as a way of thinking. Our children live in a world where almost every aspect of life, from medicine to technology, rests on evidence, testing, and reason. They see that natural explanations work. Germ theory explains disease better than curses. Astronomy explains the stars better than myth. When explanations grounded in observation succeed again and again, and when those explanations make life better, curing illnesses, extending lifespans, connecting people across the globe, it becomes harder to accept stories that cannot be tested or...
On this point, though, and some of this is correct. So the first part, no need to contest. But the second part, there is a need to contest. The contention is in the factor that even if science does everything perfectly, people will still attribute it to faith if they believe in faith. Because part of me gets a vibe that they don't understand religion very well. Because if you understand religion very well, you can have people who are religious and also aren't denying of science, because they factor in faith as an extra mode, so to speak, of something else. Faith is the anchor, science is human stuff. God is their protector, so on, so on, so on. Science, therefore, they want to keep pushing on in advance. But they will never give up their faith and belief in God. Because for them, God is true, no matter what. So science advancing won't necessarily lead to less religion.
Without evidence, science earns trust through proof. That difference grows clearer every day to young minds raised in an age of instant fact-checking. But there is something even more personal shaping this shift. Authenticity. Younger generations value being true to themselves more than any before. They distrust institutions, question authority, and crave transparency. They grew up watching scandals. Religious leaders exposed for corruption, abuse, hypocrisy. They saw how often those who preached virtue failed to live by it. These revelations cut deep, because when an institution claims to speak for the ultimate truth, yet hides crimes or silences questions, it destroys its own credibility, and young people notice. Once that trust is broken, it rarely returns.
Right, we have a issue here in which definitely confirmed when I watched it the first time that they are talking from a Western-centric mindset. Authenticity. That is a big factor that actually determines that they are talking about a exclusivity of their own ideals. More Western ideals. It's mostly in Northern European and American cultures in which authenticity is pushed to that degree that you have to be authentic. Like, yes, of course, can it be true that people in any country can seek that? Yes. But in a lot of countries, it's seen, even to this day, as more traditional to be adherent to culture, adherent to your elders, adherent to your parents. You don't have that sense of personal freedom in that degree. You exist. Your parents may love you, but you still have to adhere to them. So on, so on, so on. So, in this sense, some parts is true, some parts is false.
So the weight of diversity. Children today grow up in on social media, in communities where they encounter people of every belief system or none at all. They see Muslims, Christians, Hindus, atheists, and Buddhists working side by side, living good lives, loving their families. That experience plants a simple but powerful question. If all
Seeing this point is fine. It is, if you do value such values, a major reach to say that because of religion, that billions of people belong to die or suffer because of they were brought up in one culture. It still doesn't take away from anything I said beforehand, talking about how it's more of still coming off a vibe of Western exceptionalism mindset, but that's besides the point. Let's move on.
plays its role too. In more places than ever, children learn about evolution, cosmology, psychology, fields that offer natural explanations for questions once reserved for religion. When a child understands that humans share DNA with every living thing, that our planet is billions of years old, consciousness and brain insights reshape how they see themselves and their place in the universe. The old narratives lose their grip, not because anyone forced them, but because they no longer fit the evidence. The hardest question any belief faces. In an age where disaster, diseases, atrocities are documented in real time, the reality of pain,
This part I do agree with. In terms of, and it actually was the reason for my leaving of religion. A lot of the answers religion provided to critical issues was greatly insufficient. So insufficient that it's redundant. So on this point, I will give credit. I do agree with this point as well, is that it's not about tradition itself, it's more about opening reality to what is actually so. And in saying what is actually so, you can actually see and actually seek actual answers and solutions. So on that point, again, fine. But there's other things that we said later. Actually, let's continue. This part also gives some interesting insight how maybe the creator is privileged. The reason I say that is because in saying that basically you have access to know what is actually so, that's actually wrong. A lot of the populations of a lot of countries don't have access to free mobility, stability, or anything other like that. They can't just do what they want and say what they want. They have to deal with the direct reality of, well, if there is this sense of what's happening, how do we deal with it as a reality? Like, philosophy, in this sense, is for privileged people. Can a poor man be a philosopher as well? Yes. But the likelihood is you will most likely have a richer person be a philosopher, because the richer person doesn't have to worry about the direct means of living as much as the poor man. So on, so on, so on.
It can rise from within, from the lives we build, the connections we cherish, the truths we discover together. That is the future taking shape before our eyes. Look at what's happening across different regions. In Western Europe, belief has been eroding for decades. Countries like Norway, Iceland, and the Netherlands are now majority non-religious, and they didn't become immoral wastelands when faith declined. On the contrary, these nations consistently rank highest in happiness, education, gender equality, and quality of life. Children in these societies grow up seeing that you don't need divine commandments to build a humane world. They don't fear eternal punishment, yet they live with a strong sense of social responsibility. That observation alone challenges the idea that morality collapses without religion. Even in the United States, a country long viewed as a stronghold of faith, the numbers are striking. Just a few decades ago, nearly 90% of Americans identified with a religion. Today, that figure has dropped to around 65%. And among Gen Z, the youngest adults, up to 40% claim no religious affiliation. Life in terms of sin, salvation, or religion still dominates public life. Cracks are forming beneath has begun, and when a cultural tide starts with the youth, past, questioning faith often meant isolation, punishment, even death. Today, it means joining a global conversation. And that conversation is growing louder every year. But there's also something deeper, something psychological. Many of the fears that once drove belief have weakened. In earlier centuries, life was brutally short. Disease, famine, and war were constant threats. Religion offered comfort, a sense of order in chaos. But modern life, despite its flaws, is safer. Medicine defeats plagues that once wiped out millions. Technology shields us from the harshness of nature. We no longer need to pray for rain. We build irrigation systems. We no longer beg for healing. We develop vaccines. When human effort solves the problems that faith once claimed to answer, the grip of superstition loosens. This doesn't mean life is easy. Anxiety and uncertainty still exist, maybe more than ever. But here's the difference. Our children are not told that suffering is punishment or that questioning is sin. They are told to seek therapy, to understand the mind, to look at causes and solutions rooted in reality.
Saying this, again, it shows it's from a Western perspective, because a lot of these dynamics talked about is not that realistic to situations. In some cases, this is actually where studying political philosophy, political studies, and political science and that sort of thing does actually get this assumption defeated. The reality is, people will seek what gives them benefit. in some cases, the benefit will not come from the state. In some of these stated positions, it's where the state itself showed some degree of care for the upholding of civilians' maintenance and welfare. But when that no longer applies, you don't have that structure. You're back to the basic insecurities. Yes, you might not have to pray for the rain and pray for irrigation, but you can still face starvation and hunger. You can still die of what is potentially incurable diseases because of government corruption. You can still die for the most stupid of reasons because of that. The fact is, as a system, only few governments actually have the welfare net to actually do that. Some countries don't even have that system, and if you're basically out of luck, you're on the streets. So yes, this thing then can lead to the principle where people can go back to faith or religion, because religion is the only sense of community they have left. Society won't care for them. Government abandoned them. And all they have left is their God, the religious community. All hope is put on that God and the religious community, because that's all they have. If that's gone, they have nothing in that situation. So in that sense, it comes from a Western sense of argumentation here. And a lot of these arguments proposed here would not apply in a non-Western system, because a lot of these arguments here functions exclusively on Western logic. Another prime example of what I'm getting at here. This is again working the assumption of Western systems functioning. More specifically, the Western liberal democratic values. And is that a thing that exists in a lot of places? Not really, no. So in some places, this is with or without religion, by the way, where you can just be in a position in which you're screwed in any case, no matter what, regardless of what you say and do about the matter. It's not a joke. So in some cases, in some countries, being religious and being non-religious does not hugely matter, because the religion will impose their doctrine on you, or if you don't follow religion, the state will impose their doctrine on you. And which do you apply? Freedom, in that sense, is leaving, abandoning your country. So in that sense, it's a very Western mindset. skip some stuff here because some parts here was absolutely relevant. So I just got back to what was actually relevant. But the point of this is that meaning is not meaningless without religion. That is, I think, is one of the better points of this video, in which can apply to any situation. But a lot of the assumptions previously before was actually based entirely off their own misconception of the reality of things. So in that angle, I would say that they are dealing with a situation in which this is their life experience, and if you're an atheist elsewhere, this outlook and mindset is not going to be helpful, because it's just going to lead you to a faster death in some areas, or social isolation. That's not the point.
It empowers us. Others fear that without religion, morality will collapse, but the evidence points the other way. Secular societies tend to have lower crime rates, higher literacy, stronger protections for human rights. Why? Because morality, rooted in empathy and reason, is more adaptable than morality frozen in ancient codes. When ethics grow from understanding consequences rather than fearing punishment, they evolve with knowledge. That's why modern secular laws protect rights for groups that were once marginalized, while some religious traditions still resist equality. Progress does not wait for dogma to catch up. Now think about how children absorb this. A child who grows up in a world where questions are encouraged instead of silenced learns intellectual courage. A child who sees diversity as normal learns tolerance. A child who experiences morality as care rather than command learns responsibility. These traits do not fade, they shape entire cultures. And as more children grow up this way, societies tilt toward openness, dialogue, and innovation. This trend does not mean all religion will vanish. Traditions will persist, adapted to new realities. Some will keep faith as a personal practice rather than a system of control. And that is not necessarily harmful. The real change is that belief will no longer dominate public life or dictate private choices. It will become one voice among many, not the voice that claims to speak for all. That is the difference between a world ruled by dogma and a world shaped by shared humanity. So when we say our children will be atheists, we're not predicting a barren cultural landscape. We're visioning a world rich with meaning, rooted in reality, where awe is not diminished but deepened, where morality is not enforced by fear but built on empathy, and where freedom is not not to appease a deity, but to one another and to future deity will disintegrate. But history tells a different story. When the divine right of kings ended, society did not fall apart. It progressed. When slavery was abolished, civilization did not crumble. It advanced. Every major liberation feels like a threat to those who benefit from the old order. But in time, it becomes the new normal. And so it will be with this. The real challenge for a post-religious future is not how to replace God. It is how to cultivate wisdom without dogma, meaning without myths, solidarity without superstition. That is not an easy task, but it is a human task. And we are capable of it, because the very fact that religion existed proves we have always been creators of meaning. The difference now is that we can do it consciously, free from fear, guided by empathy and reason. When you step back and see the full picture, the conclusion is clear. The world our children inherit will not be perfect, but it will be freer. It will be a world where questions are not punished, where diversity is not feared, where morality is not frozen in texts written millennia ago, but grows with our understanding of life. That world is being born quietly in classrooms, in online forums, in families that teach their children to think rather than obey.
Yes, I want this to be partially true, it's still not factually correct. The reality is, the world is not in that position at all. They may say, and this is the issue with such content, they preach about this sort of mindset, but don't calculate in what it is for those who don't have a lot of Western privilege. If you had to do everything you did when you leave religion, without Western privilege, without freedom from and to religion principles, what do you have? You just have yourself going down a path of just ostracization. And this is where it can be indirectly a dangerous principle. While some of these principles shown in this video is okay, some of them are not okay. Because a lot of these principles that are advocated for are still a misguided principle. Some people will need to take a long time to abandon a god. The reasoning in it not being true sometimes is just not going to be good enough of a reason to leave God and religion behind, because a lot of those principles they have is the only form of stability they have in their life. It could be their only means of access to food, charity, or support. And that's what we've at. If you are to create anything on this topic, do not fall into a Western-centric mindset, because that is where you're going to fall into the pitfalls where you make assumptions. But the assumptions themselves are only going to be for a select few people and a select few societies. I mean, could all this be true in certain countries? Absolutely. But the world? No. So the question of, are your children going to be atheists? You don't know. You generally have no idea. And that is where I'll leave it at. And I hope you learned something from this, and I hope you do not repeat the issues here.